many of the apostles died a martyr's death. We know of one who died of natural causes, one who died by suicide. But the Bible doesn't record for us the death of all of the apostles, but we do know, according to Christian tradition, that Peter was crucified upside down in Rome during the reign of Nero. By his own request, he said, "Please don't crucify me the same way Jesus was crucified. I am unworthy." And they crucified him upside down. His brother Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross in Greece. James, the son of Zebedee, James the Greater, was beheaded by order of the King Herod Agrippa I around AD 44. John the Beloved died of old age and natural causes. Philip was martyred, possibly crucified, or even hanged in Hierapolis. Bartholomew, who also has the name Nathaniel, was traditionally filleted alive and then beheaded in Armenia. Thomas was speared to death while preaching the gospel, but he took the gospel all the way to India. Matthew or Levi died under various traditions. Some say he was stabbed, burned, or beheaded in Ethiopia or around that region. James the Less, the son of Alphaeus, it's said to have been thrown from the temple and then been beaten to death. Thaddeus or Jude was clubbed and then beheaded in Persia along Simon. Simon the Zealot had various traditions, but tradition says he was sawn in half, crucified in Persia. And we know well, the Bible records for us that Judas hanged himself because of his guilt for betraying Jesus Christ. What cost is too high for Christ? Listen, church, look at me, please. When Jesus sent out the disciples, Mark intentionally pauses and tells us about John because he wants us to understand Jesus sent these men and most of them would die, some even worse than John. Yeah, they came back. But when Jesus ascended and they continued the ministry of Jesus Christ, they gave their life for Christ. Their courage stood up against the world and said, "I don't care what you choose to do to me. Whether you fillet me, saw me in half, cut off my head, crucify me, stone me, it doesn't matter. I will have the courage to stand for Christ." And they weren't the only ones. The book of Acts records for us the first martyr for the cause of Christ, a man named Stephen. Stephen was one of the first deacons of the early church and the first recorded follower of Jesus to die for his faith. When the Jewish leaders became enraged by his testimony about Jesus Christ, they dragged him outside of Jerusalem and stoned him. As the stones fell, Stephen looked into heaven and declared, "Behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God." And in his final breath, he prayed in Acts 7, verse 60, "Lord, lay not this sin to their charge." When he had said this, he fell asleep. His death was not the end of his witness. Standing nearby was a man named Saul. And God would revolutionize his life. He would become Paul, the great missionary. One of the disciples of John the Beloved is a man named Polycarp. Polycarp was a disciple of John, and when Roman officials demanded that he curse Christ and swear loyalty to Caesar, the elderly bishop said, 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me?" They went to nail him to the cross, to the stake, and he said, "You don't need to nail me. I'm here to die for Christ." And so they bound up his hands. They lit the fire under him, and as the fire raged, the people of the area were so upset because he wouldn't burn. They came and they took a sword and stabbed him, and the blood came out and quenched the fire. And they said, "What kind of man is this?" 86 years old, willing to die for Christ. Vivia Perpetua and a young lady named Felicity were executed as Christian martyrs in Carthage, North Africa around 203 AD during the persecution under a Roman emperor. According to the early Christian account known as the Passion of Perpetua and Felicity, Perpetua, a young noblewoman and mother, was pregnant when she was arrested and prayed to God to preserve the life of her child before her death. And God granted her that she gave birth to her little girl before she was executed. Felicia, an enslaved woman, had also recently given birth. They were arrested with several other Christians for refusing to announce their faith. They were condemned to death in the arena during public games. The group around them was first exposed to wild animals. They were trampled and gored by bulls and all these different terrible animals. But Perpetua and Felicia survived that part of the execution. They were then taken back into the arena and killed by the sword. Tradition says they were either beheaded or struck to death by a gladiator. Perpetua's final words, recorded in the arena, were reportedly encouragement to her fellow Christians. She said, "Brothers, stand fast in the faith and love one another." We read of one of my favorite people, an Anabaptist man named Felix Manz. Felix, during the Reformation, was 28 years old. He became convinced from the Scriptures that baptism belonged to the believers who personally confessed Christ and not infants. Because he refused to abandon his conviction, the authorities of Zurich condemned him for his beliefs. According to Anabaptist tradition, Felix was condemned to death. They said, "You want to be rebaptized? We'll rebaptize you." And they condemned him to death to be drowned in the Limnat River. It's said that as he was taken in chains down the streets towards the shore, a fellow preacher followed him and said, "Just deny Christ, just deny this belief, He'll preserve your life." And as this false preacher said this, they passed by Felix Manz's mother. She burst out of the crowd and said, "No, Felix, no! Stand firm! Suffer for Jesus' sake!" They took him in the middle of the river and drowned him to death. In 1945, there was a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was a German Lutheran pastor and theologian. He traveled to the United States of America to go to seminary, and while he was in seminary, the war broke out in Europe. Bonhoeffer was so overtaken by the wickedness of the Nazi regime and what it was doing to his people, he said, "I cannot stay in the safety of America," and traveled back to Germany. And he began to preach against what the Nazi regime was doing to Christians and believers. In July 20th, 1944, he was a part of a plot to assassinate Hitler that failed because a bomb was placed on the wrong side of a table. He was a part of that plot. He was arrested with several other prisoners and sent to camps at Flossenburg, a Nazi military court. He was sentenced to death in a brief proceeding. He was hanged alongside several other resistance members on the morning of April 9th, 1945, less than 1 month before the end of the war in Europe. A fellow prisoner, a man named Payne Best, later reported that Bonhoeffer's final words were this: "This is the end. For me, the beginning of life." See, the story of John the Baptist and the disciples and of so many others are why we sit here today. Why we have our faith. Do you know why we're not Catholics? Because there were a group of people that stood up against the Catholic Church and said, "It's wrong what you're teaching according to the Bible." Do you know why we're not Muslims? Because there were a group of people that stood up and said, "We don't care what your prophet has said. The Word of God preceded all of these things, and Jesus Christ is the only true God." Do you know why that we have the freedom that we have to worship today? Because there have been men and women who were willing to stand up against tyranny, who had the courage to stand up, and it didn't matter what it cost them. They stood for truth.